Welcome to the channel, everybody. This is Hayden Otto here, and today we've got special guest Roger Villa and also Daniel Kelman, who is the lawyer of Roger and Bitcoin.com. And today we are going to be going over and discussing the truth about what really happened with CoinFlex from Roger's perspective, because to date Roger hasn't really given his side of the story, and there are reasons for that, which we'll get into in a moment. But he's now able to speak about what had transpired more than a year and a half ago now, I think. Roger, basically, I wanted to first hear from you. How does it feel to finally be able to speak about your side of the story?
Yeah, it feels wonderful to be able to get out my side of the story, other than it's about a year and a half too late. And I'll explain the reason why it's a year and a half late on that front. So long story short is I was a customer of CoinFlex. The entire platform was incredibly mismanaged, just a horrible, horrible platform, but I was fooled into using it. Deposited a whole bunch of money there, figured out that I was losing money, not earning money on the platform, told Mark Lamb and others at CoinFlex, like, just close out my positions. I want to be done with CoinFlex. Their response to me was no. They refused to close my positions. And I didn't have the ability to do it myself because they were the ones managing all the money and the funds that were in there. I told them to close out all my positions and just give me my remaining money back. They said no. The positions became worse and worse and worse there. And then I sued them. CoinFlex was the defendant the entire time, and it went to arbitration in Hong Kong.
Right. So this is a brief synopsis of Roger's side of the story, but I thought maybe I will recap for viewers what the official side of the story has been to date, so viewers can get a bit of a refresher. How does that sound? And then we can hear your side in full and see how that compares.
Although, to be honest, I think my side in full is the true story, so it'll give kind of a summary there if you don't mind. So,
yeah, go for it. But obviously, there was.
I'll cover what Mark did. Don't believe me. I'm eager to cover what Mark did. So.
Yeah. Okay. Well, how about I just run through that quickly, and then you can tell us what really happened based on what you experienced. On the 20th of June in 2022, this is when rumors about withdrawals at CoinFlex were not being processed, and this began to circulate. And Mark had said that there was a withdrawal backlog.
Transaction backlog, I believe.
Yeah, this was the official story back then. And then 3 days later, yeah. 3 days later, he said that this withdrawal pause is official, and they put out some blog post. And then on the 29th of June, they said that they named you specifically, and they said that you owed them $47 million. But then that amount actually increased to $84 million about a month or so later, I believe. So somehow that value that they allege that you owed them increased double, basically. And, all this time they said that something along the lines of that you had some agreement with them where you could essentially trade without putting up or you were allowed to go into a negative balance on your account without putting up collateral, basically, to back the trade that you were conducting at the time. And that went extremely negative, and this was why things went belly up. So essentially that's the official story. And then they said that they launched the arbitration against you in Hong Kong to try and recover funds, and they created this RVUSD token and all this other stuff. And this is what they were telling the CoinFlex creditors, basically, to try and, I don't know, get them to calm down, I guess, and go along with what they wanted to do. So would you say that is an accurate summary of what Mark said? At least
no, and I could see
then
Daniel
we'll go on to
jumping
what
in
you
to get
said.
there. Go for it, Daniel.
I can give the transaction backlog thing. What happened was we saw there was an issue and said to CoinFlex, I think on June 24th, look, either you guys have to tell everyone that there are no transaction backlogs and what the real problem is, or we're going to. And they threatened and said, well, we're just going to release this Roger coin thing. That's what they called it, Roger coin. And we're going to blame. Yeah, we're going to blame you. Originally, what they told us was it was Roger coin, and they later changed it to RVUSD. They threatened that they were going to go on Bloomberg and release this to the world. And I was like, Rob, this is ridiculous. Just sue them. They owe you $200 million. They've been lying about all this, and we can get into what happened after. And so that's what we did. We filed arbitration that very same day because they weren't going to go public and tell everyone there were no transaction backlogs, and sent them a letter and basically said,
and let's be clear, they were lying. I'm sorry to interrupt. They were lying to the public, saying, "Oh, everything's fine. It's just transaction backlogs. Keep sending in your new deposits." So lots of people deposited more money when CoinFlex was already insolvent. So they were lying to the world and deceiving them about that. Sorry to interrupt.
That's right.
Daniel.
We didn't want fresh money to be sucked in. So we filed arbitration and said, by the way, arbitration is confidential in Hong Kong, legally required to be confidential. So if you go on Bloomberg and talk about this, there's going to be serious legal consequences for you. And they went on Bloomberg. Mark Lamb went on Bloomberg and didn't say anything. But what happened was there were all these rumors bubbling up amongst the media that, and Roger was getting calls from all these people about the debt he allegedly owed CoinFlex. So instead of going out and publicly saying this, they just spread rumors secretly. So Roger sent a tweet saying, look, there are rumors I'm hearing that I owe money to CoinFlex. Let me be clear. I don't owe anything to CoinFlex. And then Mark Lamb saw that and came out and publicly blamed Roger and broke confidentiality. And that's how it began.
Yes. So I know about the when they started saying, "Oh, it's a transaction backlog," they were still accepting deposits, and many people were complaining about the fact that they hadn't put up any kind of warning or anything like that. That they were not actually processing withdrawals at this time. So who knows how much money they were able to continue to draw into that platform at the time. But this was one of the major complaints that creditors had at the time about that, for sure.
We know people who lost money in that. Yeah.
And it was CoinFlex that specified that any disputes would have to be settled into Hong Kong arbitration. So that was their initial request that was the case. So, okay, we have a disagreement. Boom. Let's go to arbitration there. And in the arbitration, there's the confidentiality clause. Neither side is allowed to speak publicly about what's going on, or they can sue the other side for breaching that. And so, the difference here is that, I'm a wealthy man. Mark hardly has two nickels to rub together. So if he goes on Bloomberg and talks about it and it's on Twitter, blaming me for everything, and I sue him for it, he has no money to pay me. If I go out there and breach the confidentiality clause, he could sue me and I could have to pay him, millions and millions of dollars for that. So I was stuck here sitting, not being allowed to say anything because of the risk there, while Mark's running his mouth all over the place on social media, telling a bunch of lies. Like they just plain scammed me and scammed everybody else at CoinFlex.
And to be clear, we lawyers, we advised Roger not to say anything. We know what Mark is doing. We know he's going public, but the right thing for you to do is not to get sucked into this social media game and you violate confidentiality. The right thing for you to do is to remain silent, respect confidentiality. And we then went to court and took out a restraining order to enforce confidentiality. And that's ultimately why months later, CoinFlex, Mark Lamb, everyone started saying, we can't talk about this anymore, and they went silent, which was right after they had taken their vote on the restructuring plan.
Speaking of the vote, they rigged their whole election too. So they froze all of my Flex coins, so I couldn't vote. Anybody that they thought would vote against them, they froze their coins on chain, so they weren't even allowed to vote. So the whole election was rigged. They lied to everybody in the Seychelles that they had a viable business and that they just need to be allowed to restructure. And I'm lying to everybody at every step of the way from the CoinFlex side about everything. And they fooled a lot of people for a lot of the time, but now I think the truth is coming out and people are realizing that those guys should never be allowed to hold a single penny of other people's money ever again. We shouldn't trust those people with anything about anything ever again.
So yeah, what you're referring to was, I remember this came out at the time, there was in the millions of dollars worth of voting power held by your company, Bitcoin.com, which, legally is considered a separate entity. And like yourself personally, I heard also other large holders had been frozen, not specifically at the time of this vote taking place, but like just throughout the last year. So clearly that was something they were, or Mark was doing to, manipulate the outcome of these votes, which were marketed as like, the community or the creditors deciding what to do. And clearly that was just them saying that to make themselves look good, and it was manipulated to some extent behind the scenes.
At the court hearing in the Seychelles, under cross-examination, it became clear that the vote was basically 8 people. Okay, there were, Mark, I believe, testified there were some 5,000 creditors who would vote, but that over 70% of the vote was like 5-6 people, something like that, just maybe a dozen different creditors. And so the trustee then approved everything based on what those few voters said. I think they were required to have more than 75% approval, and they had like 74%, and the judge approved the whole thing anyway, which I still can't believe happened, but it happened.
Another thing I'd like to point out too, like in Seychelles, Daniel and I were trying to wrap up CoinFlex, and people would have gotten back, 30 cents on the dollar or something of their money right away if that had happened. Instead, Mark spent the rest of the customer money paying his personal fines in the UAE. He got fined for, illegally operating exchange license, and then spent the rest of the money probably on the lawyers opposing, me trying to have the company wrapped up and a lawsuit with me. So he spent the rest of the money. There's no money left. He spent everybody's money on that. So if Seychelles had done the right thing and wrapped up CoinFlex right to begin with, everybody would have gotten back some percentage of their money. But the thing that really irks me about this is I was an investor in CoinFlex. At one point, I had 20% ownership of CoinFlex. And Mark and Sudu and like the CoinFlex guys are like, we're transferring our corporate structure from the Seychelles to, Grand Cayman Islands or this and that. Nothing is changing at all in the ownership structure whatsoever. Just sign here. And it's like, rather than reading like the 30-page document, I mistakenly believed them and trusted them. So I signed there. And this was like a couple of months before everything blew up or whatever. And so they transferred the ownership structure from Seychelles to somewhere else. I had forgotten that had happened. And so when we filed our initial thing in Seychelles, we said like, hey, I own 20% of the company. I have, standing here in court. And then CoinFlex side came back and says, no, Roger doesn't own that because now it's some other company somewhere else. And so the judge, I don't know what his thinking was, but the quote that the judge uses is that Roger came to the court with unclean hands, meaning that like I had just been confused as to which corporate entity actually owned my shares in CoinFlex. And then Mark's then going on social media saying the judge has already ruled that Roger has unclean hands this and unclean hands that, and he just used that into like twisted that into a talking point. But the really insidious part about that is that I had 20%. They told me just sign here, we're moving to the other entity. They diluted my equity by half, by 10%, from 20% to 10%, didn't tell me. They cheated me out of half my equity with that whole thing too. I didn't find out until later, but like they cheated me on that, and that happened months before this whole CoinFlex thing blew up. So like, and I have the emails very clearly where they told me, there's no change whatsoever in the equity structure. The reality is there was no change in that part of the equity structure for this thing, but they brought in a whole new entity that owns 50%. So my equity got cut in half there, and he was just lying to me about that, and just it's just shocking, like the crazy stuff that these people did. And the other part too, I want to say it again. I'm the one that initiated the lawsuit against CoinFlex. They were the defendant. I sued them. They were the defendant. And then they're going all over the world trying to claim that they sued me. No, I was the plaintiff. They were the defendant the entire time.
Roger sued for $200 million. And then they came out and released, if you recall, this composite to everyone. And nowhere on that composite did they claim that they had a $200 million liability, but they claimed to have an $84 million asset, which was their lawsuit against Roger. It was a blatant lie, right? If you're going to claim your lawsuit is worth $84 million, you're suing for $84 million, and you're claiming it's worth $84 million, you should at least claim that your lawsuit against you for $200 million is a $200 million liability. Instead, they just omitted it.
Just didn't even mention it, which they wound up settling, admitting that I'm owed over $200 million at this point, and there's some additional lawsuits that will happen to try and reclaim some of that. But CoinFlex is just...
Look, there's a lot of points to to cover there, and it all sounds pretty crazy once you hear the other side of the story. But I found, like you mentioned to me previously about the fact that they diluted your equity, and when you said that, I was like, hang on a second, like, I'm seeing like a recurring pattern here in what's going on. We were promised a certain percentage of equity in the CoinFlex company, and now no longer is he giving us equity in that. Basically, he's asking us to trade our claim for equity to receive a lesser percentage of equity in some new company. And so that's basically
a new company, OpenX, that's already been caught faking volume too. So he's already just pulling the same shenanigans with that one as well. So like literally his new exchange is caught faking volume already.
As well, you mentioned that you were the one that you started your arbitration against him first, but they never mentioned any of that. That was another thing that I guess creditors were kept in the dark about massively. We didn't know anything. We were all led to believe that, oh yeah, we're going after Roger and we're going to get all this money back from him to pay everyone back. And so from that point, he was always trying to get everyone on his side and demonize you. And again with that clean hands, he didn't come with clean hands quote from the Seychelles court. That was another major point that Mark was pushing to
one of his favorite talking points.
Back up his side of things there. And we didn't really know what that was about at the time. But also since then I've seen him twist what the court has said to try and benefit his agenda, essentially. Currently, there is a group of creditors that are in control of the CoinFlex company, and Mark is no longer involved there. He's basically been booted out. Well, he's focusing on his new thing anyway, but they've discovered a lot of fraud and things going on there that they're trying to get on top of and pursue him over. And so they've launched legal action against him. And the court said something about that dispute that has been launched there. And Mark, again, used what the court said and twisted it in a way that made it sound like the opposing side is somehow in the wrong. And it turned out that was not the case. Basically, they said, something about, they were trying to interfere in Mark's other company and, they can't do that. And it was just another confusion about all these different shell companies and how things are set up. It was just the confusion, basically, like what happened with you.
Yeah, she has a history of misrepresenting the truth.
Well, I mean, to the one thing you can say is that, look, Mark wanted CoinFlex to survive. I can understand that. He put a lot into it. It was worth. He got a $300 million valuation, and poof, it was gone. And he probably didn't want to accept that and wanted to save it. And he fought like hell trying to win this case. But right before trial, when the hearing was about to happen and he was going to have to testify under oath and face cross-examination and get ripped to shreds, he decided to settle, which was the right move. And all the information came out at that time to us. And he settled because the case was over. It was done. And he wasn't willing to go on the stand. And so, look, I have to say that was the right thing to do, because had he not done that, he probably would have wasted a lot more of creditors' money. So there was the settlement, and, it stands. I believe some of the creditors want to overturn it. But I think that's, not a wise move, and we'll reserve discussion on that. But we're happy that Mark did decide to do the right thing in the end.
Well, almost. I want to point out, too, Mark was supposed to put out a press release clearing my name and saying, hey, Roger never owed us any money. He would sue us, basically clearing my name. He's been refusing to put out that statement. And if anything, it just makes me even more upset with Mark. And it's just one more example of his dishonesty and manipulative tactics there. Mark, you need to put out the statement there clearing my name and admitting that I never owed you guys anything and that you guys were the ones that owed me money and that I sued you, and you lied to the whole world about the whole lawsuit the whole time.
So that was part of the settlement agreement. agreement that he would do that, but hasn't done that yet.
Yeah, well, it wasn't written into the actual final settlement agreement, but he told me verbally, and I think I even have a recording of him telling me verbally that he would do that.
Well, I interviewed him recently, as I'm sure you're aware, and like I prepared a bunch of Roger-related questions for him that he didn't want to talk about. So, yeah, but obviously a lot of those questions that I had prepared were relating to this settlement, which was kept secret from all of the creditors. We only heard about that from you, basically, I'm pretty sure.
I think to be fair that we told him not to say anything at the time after the settlement, and we would break it when we were ready, because there's still some unfinished business there that that's going on.
Okay, so it must have been the CoinFlex creditor group that has taken control now. That were the ones that were speaking about it, I think, because obviously they're not happy about that.
Well, to be fair, they don't really know what happened either. We tried to have a discussion with them, and they basically wanted to litigate and all this stuff instead. So there's no point in discussing with someone who wants to be hostile. But if they knew everything that had happened, they probably would have a different opinion. But what we learned is that Mark hadn't informed his lawyers at Clifford Chance of everything that actually happened. There was evidence that was withheld, right, that we didn't receive in the case, and we only received afterwards when discussing the settlement. So,
a lawyer understands how big a deal that is, but let me summarize for the general public. So like when there's a lawsuit, both sides ask the other side or tell the other side, hey, give us all the documents about this, all the documents about that. They have to give the other side all the information about that. So this turned out that when we're in a big giant lawsuit with CoinFlex, they didn't give us all the information. They were hiding a bunch of additional stuff that we then wound up getting later on, that if we had it earlier, it would have made my case even stronger against CoinFlex. So they were lying in their disclosures to us and were holding back evidence. That's a really, really big deal, and maybe even criminal in certain jurisdictions. Daniel can speak to that part, but
I think it's borderline. Well, let's just say I don't think the lawyers at Clifford Chance knew. If they knew, they would have handed it over, because at the same time they were accusing Roger of not giving all the information that they were requesting, when their side was in fact the one withholding things. But in the end, ultimately, it didn't matter, and the fact that they withheld it was going to become something that was going to be revealed at the trial, and I think that Mark knew that. And that at that point the game was basically over, and he might as well settle at that point. And frankly, the settlement does, it could have been a lot worse, right? Like CoinFlex would have lost and owed Roger $200 million instead of the $100
plus additional
million
damages and whatever else. So.
I've been obviously that creditor group disagrees with what Mark did and settled with you. And I've been trying to understand why, and I haven't really got that much information. But obviously, there was some kind of agreement between you and CoinFlex regarding how you were able to trade on their platform there. And so let's go back and talk about that, and talk about this specific trade that caused all this problem to begin with, and what actually went on behind the scenes there, and why things ended up the way they did.
Sure. So we had what was called a manual margin agreement, which means like I have to keep positive equity in my account at CoinFlex, which I did. And then if I'm asleep or the market moves a whole bunch and I'm not at the computer, they're supposed to contact me and say, hey, put in more equity into your account. And so, which like I did a number of times there as the market had gone down. And then at a certain point I told them, okay, this isn't working out. Like the AMM thinks they had on CoinFlex, I'm losing more money than I'm earning each day. Like I'm paying more money in interest than I'm earning each day. I told them just close everything. And I didn't have the ability to close it myself. Mark was doing everything manually for me. I told him, close everything out. I'm done. I just want to cut my losses and be done. I told them verbally, I told them in writing, and I told them multiple times. Mark's response is, no, we can't. Whereas the reality is they didn't want to, because they were about to raise an additional $40 million from outside investors at a $300 million valuation. If they lost their biggest trader on the platform, that investor is going to back out. They're not going to get the $40 million of investment. So he refused to close out my positions. And at that point, it's his problem. I already told him. But Mark went and misrepresented to the world and all the other people out there that, like, rather than it being a manual margin account, he said it was a non-liquidation account or something like that, meaning that, like, he's not allowed to close the positions, which is just insane. What sort of trading platform won't let you close a position if you want to close a position? So, like, everything that happened after the point where I told him to close out my positions and I'm done, that's his problem and his responsibility. And that after I had already told him to close everything out and I had positive equity, they would have owed me money back at these points. And if he had just followed my instructions, CoinFlex would have survived, like, things would have still been okay. Instead, he rolled the dice with not just my money, with everybody's money on the platform there. And it caused an even bigger disaster than it would have been for him just not raising his $40 million of investment.
Yeah, so I'll say initially that CoinFlex was pushing Roger to take a manual margin account. They were pushing him to scale up his investments and do all these things and basically throwing manual margin at him. And he was an investor in the company and wanting to help and doing whatever he could to help BCH. They told him that collateralizing his positions with BCH would help BCH, right? Everything they could to get him to scale up, and he did, including giving him manual margin without even asking for it. And there was no written agreement. So then when everything is collapsing, as Terra Luna is just falling apart in, like, around early to mid-May, they approach Roger and ask him, hey, will you please sign this written manual margin agreement, which you had never signed anything before to accept. And Roger, wanting to help, not showing it to me, not showing it to anyone, just being helpful to CoinFlex, just signed it without thinking anything.
So that was in the month before all the trouble started.
That was on, I think, May 14th. Within a day or two of May 14th.
Before they really had into trouble.
Yeah, before that. So then he signs that agreement, which basically says, I think, there's a grace period of 3 days where they're going to liquidate Roger if he doesn't pay in any more capital, right? And then they ask for more capital. You're negative, Roger. He pays in. They ask for more. Then finally Roger says...
I wasn't negative. I was just low.
Low, right. Yeah, we didn't know if you were negative.
Their accounting was such a mess too. So
Roger couldn't tell from the user interface if he was positive or negative. He couldn't control it himself. Mark had scaled him up, and Mark was basically controlling it. And so they tell him, "We need more money, Roger. We need more capital." We didn't know if it was buffer collateral or if he was negative. So at some point, I think around the 26th of May, Roger just said, "Look, I've had it. I've lost enough money. Liquidate me." And they refused. They tried to talk him out of it. They said, "Oh, we can liquidate your XRP in this," and what was the other one? XRP and something else. We can't do BCH. We can't do BCH. And anything they could to not liquidate his BCH position, they wouldn't do, because that's what backed Flex USD. And they didn't want to have to unwind the whole thing right before the raise. And so they just thought, if we can just keep Roger as our backstop liquidity provider long enough to get through this storm, we will survive. And, when Roger told them to liquidate, they should have liquidated. When 3 days expired based on the manual margin agreement and Roger hadn't paid in the money, they were required to liquidate, and they didn't. They just kept letting the whole thing run. And when Roger filed for arbitration, they said, "Oh, Roger, you weren't clear about whether you wanted to liquidate, so it's all your fault. You're on the hook for $84 million, right? Or at least first 47 million, and then 87 million later after they refused to liquidate Flex, people who had Flex collateral, right? They just let that go negative without liquidating them, and it became 84 million. So that's how the whole thing happened. There was no written agreement, and Roger was unable to liquidate his own position himself. As assets are falling, the liquidation engine is supposed to liquidate people automatically, right? So they didn't want to liquidate Flex collateral. They didn't want to liquidate Flex coins because it would have put Flex to zero. And basically, what they wanted to raise money for CoinFlex, right, to try to get themselves out of the hole. And the way they were trying to do that was by not liquidating Flex collateral and claiming that all these Flex coins are worth X amount of money, so we want this valuation, so please give us more money, investors. Had they liquidated Flex collateral, right, then Flex coin would have been zero, and they'd have had a much lower valuation. So what they did was they created an additional like $40-some million hole by choosing not to liquidate the Flex collateral, right?
A $40 million hole
right.
just within like my account, but the overall exchange was like an extra like $200 million hole or something because there are all the other flex holders out there as well.
Yeah, so they didn't liquidate those flex positions, and when they turned the exchange back on, right, like they had to, like the liquidation engine has to liquidate stuff in time, right? So like you had to say you had to liquidate flex at $1. When they turned it back on, it was at 20 cents, and they hadn't liquidated anything, so they had to eat that loss from $1 down to 20 cents, and that's where the additional $40-some million hole came from. Was that gamble that they could not liquidate flex and raise money from investors, and they tried to sue Roger for that as well.
So yeah, there definitely seems to be a bit of a conspiracy going on here, as far as I'm concerned. But I wanted to get you guys to address some of the concerns of some other people, like creditors that have heard what you've already said, Roger. And so one of the arguments that you've said on like Telegram, for example, was that basically you believed that there was some kind of coordinated effort to trade against you and specifically liquidate you. So what's the deal with that? I've had a look at the price chart, obviously, during that period, and it wasn't just BCH going down. It was like the whole crypto market. Also, like Bitcoin Cash is not just traded on CoinFlex; it's traded across a number of exchanges. So if you could address that, I think there's some of the questions people are wondering.
Yeah. In addition to all the stuff that we just talked about with Mark refusing to like close out my positions, he was also running his mouth telling all these other people about my positions so that then they had the opportunity to trade against. And if you look at the chat logs of the timing of who he told and when he told them, and then the different trades that happened, like very, very clearly that was going on as well. So that's in addition to all the other problems that we just spoke about. He was running his mouth about my positions to other people that then took advantage of that as well, which he's not allowed to do as an exchange.
From the very beginning of Roger trading on the exchange, but we can't get into those details at the moment. More on
There's
that
more lawsuits
coming
coming
later. Yeah.
From what I've seen and heard, I think that obviously if Mark was in full control of all the positions and everything like that, and you had no control over this, then how can it be your fault that what happened? It was obviously in full control of Mark. And you obviously have proof that you gave him instructions to close all these positions down. So it's pretty crazy that he ended up doing.
I told him in writing and I told him on video calls. And so I have like 100% proof of that as well.
And obviously that's none of this stuff was mentioned anywhere to creditors until you started speaking just recently about this.
I mean, I just said we wanted to throughout this whole period, Roger wanted to tell everyone. I wanted to tell him to tell everyone, but I couldn't. And it was because, we had to respect confidentiality. We had to play the long game of winning the arbitration and making sure, right? Like the arbitrator has to choose who to trust and who's more believable. And you have to be consistent. And breaking confidentiality when there's a rule and a law that you have to respect is not something that you do if you're serious about winning a case. It's something you do if you're desperate and you're looking for a Hail Mary. So that was what Roger had to do, and as a result, people had to remain in the dark, and that wasn't easy to see happen. It surely wasn't easy for Roger to sit back and say nothing. And perhaps the most regrettable part of all of it is that SmartBCH became like collateral damage. We tried in Seychelles to protect it. Roger filed a motion to try to argue that it was a part of a quis close trust, which I think it actually was, and should not have been part of the bankruptcy estate. It should have been held separate for all the people who gave it to CoinFlex. But it's actually the creditors right now who are in charge of CoinFlex who disagreed with that decision and wanted to forfeit that money to CoinFlex so that they would have more to return. Those people, bear some responsibility. I don't know all the details, but I do know that was what CoinFlex's plan was, and that's what the creditors who were, advising CoinFlex on the lawsuit against Roger wanted to do.
So that's a fancy way of saying that CoinFlex stole all the SmartBCH bridge funds that were supposed to be treated completely separate from CoinFlex so that the SmartBCH ecosystem could flourish until there was a decentralized bridge in place. So the CoinFlex and their creditors literally stole all the bridge funds from SmartBCH while I was there in Seychelles with Daniel, doing the actual legal work, suing them, trying to get them to treat the SmartBCH funds as completely separate from CoinFlex, which is what everybody understood and Mark told everybody was going to be the case. But when push came to shove, he defrauded everybody of the SmartBCH bridge funds as well. So really, really a horrible disaster there too. And basically, not only did CoinFlex go down, they destroyed the entire SmartBCH ecosystem in the process by stealing those SmartBCH bridge funds.
So what was that worth at the time? It was like an extra 10 million or so US dollar, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
Wasn't it?
In the grand scheme of how much money CoinFlex lost of other people, it wasn't that much money, and it didn't wind up saving CoinFlex anyhow. It just destroyed this entire ecosystem that, as we know, was really starting to take off. SmartBCH was getting some good traction.
Well, yeah, I was involved in that and like participating in that. It was really good until this happened, basically.
Yep. And
despite the fact that they took all that extra money that wasn't really theirs to take, we got, the creditors got paid out less US dollars than what we were even initially promised. So, there's a lot of money just going missing as far as I'm concerned.
They took the 10 million to use to pay lawyers and all these things that they were going to do with the rest of CoinFlex's money, which basically sacrificed SmartBCH just so that they would have to pay a little bit less money and take a little bit less of a loss in trying to sue Roger for more. So that was a regrettable decision. And part of that was, because Roger couldn't say anything publicly and everyone was just dependent on what Mark Lamb was saying. But I don't know what all the creditors knew at the time, right? Because Mark was probably giving them information about the arbitration because they were funding part of it, but we have no idea what he actually told them or what any of those people knew. So it would be very interesting if you get a chance to talk with them to find out exactly what Mark advised them and told them and what they knew at the time regarding the SmartBCH decision.
I do plan on talking to the guy that is leading the CoinFlex creditor group or whatever at the moment. But based on what I know at the moment, their belief is, and what they're really relying on in going after you, Roger, is that there was some agreement between you and CoinFlex, and it's like black and white that what you did was wrong according to them or according to this agreement. And so that I, based on all of that and like putting together the pieces, I kind of get the feeling that Mark has probably lied to them or possibly even put together some fake documents and supplied that to them in order to trick them. And that's just my opinion on like reading everything, wide spectrum analysis.
Wouldn't that be interesting if there were some fake documents put together by Mark?
I mean, look, the only witness for their side was Mark, right? So now what do they have? Well, I mean, the agreement.
Well, now they don't even trust Mark.
They don't even have him as a witness. Mark, supports what Roger's telling you. He came out and we had this discussion. We settled based on what we're saying. Mark is more or less, in agreement. He's in agreement with everything the settlement agreement says. That's for sure. We both signed it. So they don't have a witness. They can say what they want to say about the written agreement, but we just told you the written agreement wasn't followed. They were required to liquidate Roger, and they didn't. I'm at a loss for what they're trying to accomplish aside from wasting more money.
It seems like they just haven't come to terms with the fact that like Mark scammed everybody and destroyed the finances of however many people were involved. Thousands of people, tens of thousands of people were severely damaged by his actions and not doing the right thing over and over and over again.
Well, I think that's really what it comes down to based upon what I'm seeing so far. But we'll have to continue to see how this all plays out, I guess. Prior to getting involved in CoinFlex as an investor, what was it that made you decide to put a lot of trust in Mark Lamb?
A mistake, I guess, is the short answer. That was a mistake. Plain and simple. But I've invested in so many different things. I just want to see the entire ecosystem, and that was a business. And in hindsight, I think Mark was just telling me what I wanted to hear. But he's like, "Oh, we can do this for BCH and that for BCH," and like anybody that's paying any attention knows BCH works so much better than BTC at this point. And so I wanted to help seed that ecosystem and help spread that ecosystem. And CoinFlex seemed like one more tool to do that. In hindsight, that was a mistake, and I shouldn't have done that. But live and learn.
Yeah, and one thing that I am curious about is, from my perspective at least, like I was pretty involved in BCH in the previous years, but Mark Lamb kind of just appeared out of nowhere, and it was kind of around this time when there was disagreements going on with the Bitcoin ABC development team, and he appeared to be one of the proponents that were like very much against those guys. And I remember he was also, through CoinFlex, he was he created the futures markets with trading the ABC coin and BCH and all that sort of stuff. And I feel like that may have been like some kind of a move to gain trust of the community. Would you have the same opinion of that?
Maybe. I don't really know, although I feel like Mark has a propensity to just say whatever seems convenient for him at the time, and whatever's convenient today or whoever he's talking to, he'll say what's convenient at that moment.
Obviously, you had a long-standing relationship, positive relationship with many of the parties involved in all this various disputes.
Yeah, I can comment on that too. Mark he put out some video claiming that like basically I've been one of his best friends and mentors for years and years and years. Like that's not true either. Like yeah, I knew him, but like we weren't best buddies and hang out and I invited him one time to hang out with me, and I met him another time because I wanted to talk about CoinFlex. Like he tried to spin it like we were best buddies and stuff, and like that was just another lie he portrayed to the public too.
And it wasn't true.
No.
Like so many other things that
Daniel's my lawyer, but he's also a very good friend of mine. Mark Lamb, I had a working relationship with him, but he never felt like a friend. So
yeah, right.
And even less so now.
Well, I don't blame you. Thanks for giving us all the insights on that. If you enjoyed this video, please share it, get the word out there about what transpired there at CoinFlex. And hopefully we can inform all the other creditors about Roger's side of the story.